What's going on, guys? It's going to be our Summary Markets episode 107. We're going to talk about ES, Nasdaq, Bitcoin, Ethereum. Then we're going to move on to gold and oil. After that, we're going to talk about some stocks that are being affected by the war with Russia and Ukraine and the sanctions that are happening in Russia. Most of these stocks fall into the energy sector. We have some wheat stocks and some fertilizer stocks as well. Those will be talked about in the second half of the video. So let's get started. Starting off with the ES, I did already freshen up the levels here. So we deleted all the old levels and we're looking at all these new levels currently. So we have the value area low and high of Friday, the value area low and high of Thursday, and then we are still watching for that value down here on February 23rd to the 24th. If we do lose this value area low around 42.98, we do have a little bit of support around 42.82 and 42.60. Once 60 is lost, you really don't have anything holding you up until you get down to 4,200 and 4,100. If we break above 43.30, keep an eye on the 200 EMA around 43.36, and then 43.50 would be the value area low. And if you maintain above that level, you have a high percentage chance to get to the 43.87. We have tried to retest this value before, but we couldn't hold above that level. So if it pushes up here and holds above that level, you should be getting a retrace back into around 4,400. As far as SPY goes, all the local gaps have been filled except for the one above us around, where is this level? Around 435. The local gaps to the downside have been filled. We still have the 400 gap. So we filled the 410, but we still have the 400. So if we start to sell off rapidly next week, keep an eye on that 400 gap. We would hope we wouldn't get that low in 1 week. Moving on to Nasdaq, you do have somewhat of a double bottom coming in here. You do need to break above the 13.9 level. Get above that. You are looking for around 14.40 and 14.013, which is the 200 EMA. If we can hold above this level, same thing with ES, you do have a high percentage chance to get a full value retrace into that 14.2. So keep an eye on that. If we do fall below 13.7, which is the value area low of Friday, you do have a little support around that 13.68, which is the range low. Get below that, we have the value retrace on the 24th, same as ES. So 13.5 all the way down to 13,000. Moving on to Bitcoin. It hit pretty much all of our targets on the upside except for the breakout targets. So if it did break out of this range, we were keeping an eye on these upper levels. So all these local levels have been hit, and now we're pulling back to retest the bearish levels. You've actually given up almost the entire breakout of the 27th all the way till the beginning of March. So that entire impulse has basically been given away. We still have a little bit left down towards like 37 to 34. So if you do fail below that 38,000, you are looking for around 36.5 all the way down to 34.4. It looks very similar to ES and Nasdaq, where we put in this kind of reversal day and it was never tested. So this is a fresh value area that has not been tested. So if we do come down to retest this area, you should get a full value retrace of the entire area, but you would have to hold back below 36.4. If it does start to break back above that 39.5, keep an eye on the 200 EMA around 40,000, and then we have a value retrace around 40,500 to 41.6. Same thing with Ethereum. You've basically given up the entire breakout. You have not tested that value, so the value back on the 24th is untested. So if we do hold below that 25.30, there's a very high chance you will get the 2300. If it does break above the 200 EMA, keep an eye on this kind of inefficiency right here. You could see that there was a long tail forming. You had very low volume on that entire tail, and it basically was not tested ever again. We do have a single print if we zoom in a little bit here. So around 2800. If we hold above the 200 EMA, look for that 2800 volume gap, okay? And then we have a couple of levels above that. Let's actually get rid of our older levels. These were targets that were being hit. Next level you would look for is around 29.05. And then you would look for 29.97, the value area highs of the previous down days. All right, moving on to oil here. We can see oil is on an absolute tear. You are hitting a 10-year high. I believe it's almost a 12-year high at this point. So breaking pretty much every single high except for the global financial crisis of 08 to 09. In all honesty, with this current trajectory, we could very well be putting in an all-time high within the next few months. So unless there is a major shift in what is going on around the world with the oil supply and the oil demand, mainly coming from Russia, obviously, this is very likely going to get an all-time high. I wouldn't say just complete straight up, like no down candles whatsoever, but it's already gone from, 64 up to 115 in 3 months. So any pullback at this point would be pretty damn bullish. Even if it pulled back and held above 100, I'd say that would still be bullish, and you're very likely still continuing into all-time high. Okay, so long term, this looks disgustingly bullish. It looks like a supply crunch. The long time frames are taking over, so be very careful when you are scalping kind of against this trend. Going to the shorter time scale, we can take a look at this local impulse, and we can gather some levels to keep an eye on. The 119 point would be right around that trigger. So when we hit that trigger point, you would be looking for 127 to 129. And then our secondary targets would be 137, 140, and then 150 being the high. What is the all-time high here? The all-time high is 147. So if you did play out this entire impulse, that would actually be hitting an all-time high. So keep an eye on that. Like I said, the trigger point would be 119. What I mean by that is if you break out here and then you start to consolidate or hold above 119, that should be fairly bullish. And any pullback to that point below the or above the previous high would be a bullish pullback. You're really not bearish on oil until you start losing like 105 to 100. So any pullback back in this area will probably be aggressively bought up. Moving on to gold, it looks very similar to oil. You have this 10-year, 12-year cup and handle playing out. Beautiful bull flag. You have this massive bull flag here on the monthly, which is finally starting to break out. So the commodities super cycle is definitely happening. We have wheat prices skyrocketing. We have silver and gold running. We've got copper running. We have lithium running, oil, obviously. So pretty much anything that is like a commodity or related to the commodity sector is doing extremely well, especially the ones related to energy. But going to short term here, we could do the same thing. We could take a look at the local impulse. This one's a little harder because the local impulse, you could say started from here or started from down here. I'm going to take this local move, so we're only going to take from right here. And then we could say that, oops, let me fix that. We could say that a break of 1980 would send you to 2000, 2006, 2025, 2032, and then the final target being 2057. If we look at the long time scale here, what is the high? The high is 2090, and I believe, yeah, that is an all-time high. So this looks like it wants to go for an all-time high, just like oil as well. So keep an eye on those levels. With gold, you're short-term bearish below 1960, but really you're not long-term bearish until you lose 1920. Any pullback down to this area would just be a continuation of the balance. All right, moving on to some stocks we want to keep an eye on here. First one here is Noble Corporation, NE. This is a oil company, fairly new. You've only been around since 2021. You had a massive bulldog come in here right on the open. Bottom, curved back, bottom, pop up, and then a little consolidation. And now we're breaking out of the consolidation. So basically at this point, anything above this previous high, we could even take like a volume profile here if you wanted to. And we could say like right here where we have that massive volume node, or we could take like the POC as well. Basically anything above these major levels is very bullish, okay? And you can kind of see how we only took the volume profile of the distribution, and look at how well this node right here acted on this pullback. So this is a very clear support and resistance flip. So now that we're staying above 27 and 28, this is a very strong impulse to the upside. And any pullback to those areas should be rather bullish, like we saw right here. It tried to pull back and then it ripped higher. So keep an eye on this. This is a gas company, so it should run with oil. Next up, we have X. This is a steel company. So long term, we are bouncing off the 200 EMA, kind of a little double bottom here, curved back. It did look like it wanted to put in kind of a rollover top and sell off, but with the commodity cycle coming in, pretty much anything that goes into these commodities or energy or anything that's related to the sanctions are doing very well. But this is also breaking out of a, what is that, 2-year high? I think it's, even if you go back, almost a 4-year high. We are coming into a pretty strong resistance level. If we do pull back to, say, what level is that? 35.20. This is a strong node you want to keep an eye on if you are trading oil, or sorry, steel here. Keep an eye on the node around 35. And then above that, you'd be looking for kind of the value area high around 39.40. These are long-term charts, obviously. So the levels are going to be pretty far out. In the meantime, to the downside, anything really above this, or you could take a horizontal. And we could also take the volume profile. And we can see that anything really above this area right here, the nodes around 26 and the downtrend, which is also lining up around 26, would be overly bullish. Any pullback in that area should be decently bought up rather quickly. Short term, let's see if we go down to a 15-minute, we can get a little impulse here if anybody is trying to day trade this. Short term, you're looking for 31.90 into 33 and 33.30. Keep an eye on those short-term levels as well. All right, moving on to wheat. Wheat is on an absolute tear. We are on, I think, nearing all-time high. All-time high was in the global financial crisis of 08-09 as well. We broke all of these local levels that I was looking at, 871, 962, 1092. We're just smashing these levels. So it's really unstoppable, to be honest. Look at it. It's already gapped up from, what, Thursday to Friday. It gapped up almost another 100 points. It's on an absolute tear. It's really hard to buy into if you're not already into this. You are looking for a pullback. The problem is the supply crunch is very similar to a short squeeze, where it does not give you very many pullbacks until the move is basically already over, right? So if we continue this, we can take the impulse. This would give us our levels. We've already hit the first breakout targets. The next targets would be around 1278, 1330, and then the final target would be around 1527. I'm going to mark these out so we can go ahead and clean our chart up and delete the fib here. But those would be the targets moving forward. Any pullback to these previous levels would be support. This one is a little far back, but long term that would still be support. Short term, look for 1090 and around 960. The wheat stocks that we're keeping an eye on to follow that uptrend is WEAT is our first one. We called this out on stream around 850. So it's already up almost, what, 50, 60%? Yeah, about 50% from, I think we called it out on Monday. But you had a nasty pullback on the daily there on Friday. You had a big breakout, but you closed red. So this is a dark cloud cover, kind of the inverse of a piercing candle, right? a bearish piercing candle, I guess you would say. But basically anything below, let's say like 1176, the high of Thursday, would be fairly bearish short term. So look for a pullback, maybe back into $10 or even into like 880. You probably will not get 880 unless wheat has a very big tumble here. We did have some extended targets. I think it hit actually all of our targets. Let me see. Yeah, it hit all of our targets. So our final target was 1244. We can extend this if we wanted to extend it towards the doji. We could. We could also extend it to the high up here, but let's keep it at the doji for now. The extended targets on this would be 1350, 1390, and then 1540. Another wheat stock that we're looking at is Daniels Adm. This one is a lot slower mover. It's not as volatile. Wheat is, well, it was a penny stock, obviously, not anymore, but it's going to move kind of like a penny stock. This is going to move more like a blue chip company, so not as risky. But we could do the same thing here. We could grab the recent impulse, and we could take a look at some targets moving up, looking for 84 and a quarter, 85.70, and then 90.50. Okay, any pullback above 78 would be very bullish. And we could also take a look at the volume profile, and it would kind of show you why that would still be bullish. You can see the POC and the value area high are maintaining right below that. So really pulling back in this area, you're just retesting balance, and then you're going for a higher value. All right, last up on the wheat stocks is ANDE, the Andersons. We could also take a fib here, right to that pullback candle. You can see how it held above the 0.13 and it pulled back to retest it. That's very bullish. Next targets would be 50.50, 51.60, and then 55. Any pullback down to 45 should be fairly bullish. You could pull back to retest the previous high somewhere around 44, kind of where we retested it on that pullback candle, but it doesn't really look like it's due for a pullback just yet. Where is the short-term VWAP? Let's see. The monthly VWAP and the weekly VWAP were around 46 and a quarter and 46.75. So anything above those levels would be fairly bullish. All right, moving on to fertilizer. We talked about these later in the week, but they're already pumping massively from where we mentioned them. I think we talked about them on Wednesday, I believe it was. But our first target is coming up on Mosaic. Mosaic, we're looking for around 60, 67, and then 65. If we zoom out, these are monthly levels. So these are the monthly levels from way back in 2012. That would be a 10-year high if we break into these levels. Same thing with this one. A pullback would be fairly bullish, but it just doesn't really look like it's ready for a pullback just yet. If you do pull back, just keep an eye on those little short-term gaps. We have that gap around 55.70. Then we also have a gap around 53.76. So keep an eye on those. You can even go as far back as here as well. Those would be decent buy points if it pulls back short term. Next up is CF Industries. This is already hitting most of our targets. The next target that we have on that is 93 and a quarter and then 109. Same thing here. Not a whole lot of levels to keep an eye on if it pulls back, because it doesn't really look like it wants to pull back. But if it does, keep an eye on these gaps. You have a gap around 82 and a quarter and then around 75. Next up, we have NTR, another fertilizer company. This one is on absolute fire. It's basically been pumping ever since 2020, and you never really lost that uptrend. But we can see here on the longer time scale, if we want to grab some really long-term levels, we can take this as like one major impulse. Because you can see how this is kind of uptrending here, but then you have a major breakout on this level here. So that gives us a really good point to pull from our fib. So if we pull our fib here, this would give us long-term targets of 100 and 106. So keep an eye on that. Short-term, we could do something very similar, but we would have to grab a shorter impulse, right? So we could take where we gapped up as where we started, and then kind of where we sold off right here as the next level. and then that would give us our short-term targets, which would be around 96, 97, and then 99. All right, what else do we have here? We're going to close it up with big tech companies, as always. Let me go ahead. We're going to clean up our charts. We're going to start fresh on these. We want to take the value area low and the value area high of Friday. And then, as I always like to grab the previous value. So the previous untested value would be Thursday. And then we have the untested value, the downside, which is the value area low around 281. We've already tested the high in the POC, so we want to keep an eye on the 281 level. So basically here, if we start to lose like 287, 286, you would be looking for 281. If it starts to hold above 291, you want to look for that 295, which is also a short gap there, very small gap. All right, same thing with Apple. We're going to grab the value area low, value area high. Same thing for Thursday, because that is the untested value above us. We also can grab the gap here if you want to. And then we have the untested value below us. So if we start to lose, like say 162, you're looking for 160 and then 154. And if we start to hold above 164, you want to look for that gap fill around 166 and a quarter. All right, Facebook is actually fairly new at the level, so we're not going to delete these. We have basically any value that's found below 202 should lead you down to 194. And then if we reclaim this 203, look for 207. But it definitely is leaning bearish here. You can see how we've been trading below VWAP for 2 consecutive days. Let's take a look at the monthly VWAP. Yeah, so the monthly and the weekly VWAP are trading above us around 204 and 205. We are kind of riding the weekly VWAP here, which did just close, so we're going to have a fresh week moving forward. But you're also riding the second deviation in the monthly VWAP, so this is pretty bearish. If you hold on to those levels like that, and you kind of just tend to stay very close to those levels. The only thing that I can say that's slightly bullish here is you have a small bull div coming in on the Momo. So if we can get a strong open on Monday, we might push back into the monthly VWAP around 204. All right, moving on to Netflix. These levels are also fairly new. One thing we could do is we could grab this and change our upside levels, make them a little fresh here. So same thing with Netflix. You're trading below VWAP for multiple days. We do have a small bull div, it seems like on the low here. If it can break back above VWAP, above like 363, you want to look for that 369 and then a value retrace into 377. But if there's no strength coming in on Monday's open, you are very likely going to go down to 355. And then if you lose 355, there is no local levels to pull from. We would have to pull from way back in January. And we would have to look at, I believe this day here is the only day that is below our current price. Oops. I didn't even know you could do that. I just posted an image in the trading view chart. That's interesting. The two levels below us would be 353 and 355. So, like I said, no strength on Monday. You would be looking for that 355 to 353. All right, moving on to Amazon. Let's get some fresh levels here. Value area low, value area high, and then we take the levels that are untested above us. If you guys ever have questions about where I get these levels from or kind of like what technique I'm using, feel free to post it in the comments and I can help you guys out. But it's fairly straightforward. Once you learn my volume profile techniques, it's very simple. But okay, so moving on here, if it does break below 2885, there's really not a whole lot holding you up. to get all the way back down to 2790. We could take this node right here. So you notice there's a pretty decent node. We could pull this out and we could say that this is decent support around, what is that? Around like 2860. So a little bit of support at 2860, lose that, 2790 is pretty much guaranteed. To the upside, we have untested value starting at 2947 going into 3017. We have not tested this value except for like the open where we tried to push into it and then we sold off. So if we do start to hold above this 2950, you do have a high chance of getting to that 3017. Anything in between here is very likely it's going to chop you out. So try not to take trades kind of in this area right here. All right, last up, Tesla. I believe these levels are fairly new. Let's just grab some new ones because I want to show you something here. Because we have like 5 days of overlapping value here, we're going to grab a composite and we're going to take the entire range here. We're going to grab the value area low, value area high, and the POC. And then we could also mark out like this little node that it tried to build on the fake out, so that we know once it reclaims that node, very likely going to break out. Same thing to the downside here. We have like a little node right here. You also have another one kind of right here as well. Okay, now we can delete this. Now we can pull these levels from below us. Okay, so what I'm seeing on Tesla is if we hold below this node, below like 830, you're very likely going to go for the gap fill into 809, and then 795 would be that next value target. And then to the upside, if you start to reclaim 845, that is the value area low of the entire distribution. So that should be fairly bullish into around 863 to 875. Okay. And then for the major breakout, we would need to stay above like 882 to 883. But all right, guys, that was the summary markets and our weekly watch list. Hopefully you guys learned something from this video. Hopefully these levels help you guys out. If you guys have any questions or comments, make sure to put them in the comments down below. And for our stream schedule moving forward this week, Monday will be at 3 p.m. Eastern for the Power Hour stream. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday will be the morning call streams. And then Friday, we will have a 3 p.m. Eastern stream as well. So I'll see you guys then. Peace out, guys.